Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. We've got a great episode coming up. I'm joined, as always, by my partner, Kim Scribner, and we've got Kelly Geyer with us. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, and we'll get right into today's topic, talking about structures and what leads to stability and what might not. So, Kelly, over to you. Why don't you give us a little background?
Hi, Kim. Hi, Gary. My name is Kelly Geyer, and I am a transformation enthusiast, let's say. So I work with organizations on not just change management on how to handle individual initiatives better, but actually how to create an organization that can continuously evolve so those big bang transformations aren't needed anymore.
Fantastic. I love the term transformation enthusiast because
Yes.
to me it feels like change. Yay!
Yeah.
What I love about that is when you work in the transformation space, like it's incredibly challenging on a day in and day out basis, right? We're dealing with humans who are quite challenging as individuals themselves. And so to hear Kelly say I'm a transformation enthusiast means she's had the painful moments and the quite amazing moments that can happen in transformation.
That's very true. Yeah, I say enthusiastically because it's true. No matter how many transformations I'm involved in, even if you're working on the same thing, say agile transformation, every company's different, all the employees are different, the challenges are different, the successes are different. So it's exciting, and every day is different, which is what I love.
I think that's why I loved this topic that we're about to talk about so much is because just like building structures are all different and require different things to stay upright and to thrive it requires us to really understand the different dynamics that happen inside each organization, whether it's the environment that they're in, the humans that are there, or even what's happening in the world that may be impacting them.
I'm curious, Kelly, how you came initially into this space, um, and maybe how you evolved into your level of enthusiasm.
Sure. So, before I got into kind of agile coaching and things like that, I had a host of other roles. So I worked in banking and financial services, wealth management, and then I got into project management at a construction company that eventually went out of business. And then my boss and I started up our own construction company. And so this is where I pulled this metaphor of the building from and having something static. So I got into project management in that space, and then I got into IT project management. And as soon as I started working at a big insurance company in the US, they said, "Hey, we're going agile. So if you were a project manager, now you're going to be an agile coach or a scrum master." And the more I learned, the more I fell in love. It was my first exposure to seeing a true change leader. So my boss there just said, "Okay, this is happening. Let's take courses. Let's get certified together. We're going to do it, together." So this was a really great example to me on how change leadership can really impact how the organization navigates through a huge transformation. So then as I migrated from the US over to Austria, I stuck in that agile space and was an agile coach even as I came over here. And then I started seeing kind of there's something missing from these agile transformations. They're not working. Even people who claim their organization is becoming more agile, they're not. I mean, when you really talk to them, because I was going to conferences and events, it's really not seeing the same success as what a lot of people would have you believe. And so I started digging a lot more into change management. And adding that to my toolkit, and then eventually got into a global change manager role, and stayed in that space for a while. And I thought, well, gosh, this is what was missing from these other transformations. Let me see what else I can do. And I could see, wow, with change management, you definitely see higher rates of success in these big transformations and big changes, but there was still something.
Mhm.
So even with the best change manager or the best agile coaches, and even if those people are working together, there's still the organization that's
Mhm.
kind of the missing piece. And there were these these structures and processes and slow decision making and governance and maybe not the right um, characteristics for the leadership that were there, or leaders who wanted to be able to lead through change but didn't know how. And so there was a lot of this building in place that was hard to change. And so I thought, okay, this is really where you need to go in order to create an organization that is adaptable. And so this is what landed me in my space now, is really working with organizations on how to become a company that can continuously evolve and doesn't need to have these major expensive transformations every year or two or several times a year, because those are also very likely to fail. We all know, if you're in change space, you know that the likelihood of success in these major initiatives is pretty low. Um, so if
What
you're
I
taking
what I
small
really
steps.
like about what you're saying is, this happened just recently. So I'm working on a not a major transformation right now, but we're partnered with an organization in their marketing team to help them with their ways of working, and specifically ensuring that they are delivering value. Right, the focus is how can we deliver more value. And the client recently said, "You keep showing up in strange places," meaning me as the external consultant. And I think that is because of all the things that you're talking about. If I'm trying to help just one function, that's not enough, is what you're saying. Is you've got to go deeper and understand what are the roadblocks within the entirety of the organization. And there's small little tweaks, right? So when you say big changes, it's really, we got to turn the dial like one small notch at a time. And it might not even be in the function that we're directly working with, but it might be something that's connected to that, that's stopping that function from being successful. So, yeah.
That's absolutely true. And this is why, kind of when I'm working with organizations, I look at it holistically. So you need some systemic thinking in there, not just, okay, what is the problem in front of me? But what are all the other factors that are pulling and pushing on this problem that may need to be addressed? And this is really important. I mean, trying to attack it just at one level,
Hmm.
you may see a little bit of success, but to truly kind of move mountains, you have to do exactly what you were just talking about, which is kind of look beyond what's just in front of you.
I'm kind of curious. So you mentioned your background and coming out of the construction world. For me, an observation has always been we borrow terms from architecture when we talk about organization structure. And we use terms that are were created to describe solid, tangible edifices, right? Things that we've built. And frequently people reflect on a built structure as good if it's been the same for a long time, right? We pack ourselves into airplanes and fly places to see the Eiffel Tower and things of that nature. And yet, when we think about an organization, the reality is it's a microcosm society. It's a culture. It's a set of interactions with a bunch of emotional critters who are humans. And the intersection of what we describe in terms that imply rigidity and strength versus evolution and resilience. How does that play into your approach to helping organizations actually successfully change and evolve?
This is absolutely true. And this is part of what I see organizations struggle with when it comes to change, is because the entire idea typically is to find stability, is to find these, like we have governance. That's a very solid sounding word. We have infrastructure, one of those borrowed terms, right? That we take from things where we say, okay, those are also terms that are used to describe things that have a start and an end. And
Yes.
transformation work isn't. And so this
I
is,
love this so much because I have been in many ways trying to change the word, at least in my own vocabulary, from transformation to evolution, right?
Mhm,
Organizations are evolving all the time. We're not
mhm.
transforming from, you know, caterpillar to a butterfly. We're actually like constantly changing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like from caterpillar to, fish or
Yeah, exactly.
to a
Yeah.
series of other
We're in
animals that
water. What
you
do we
get.
do now? Yes.
Things just got weird. Uh,
But it's true, and this is, and even on my website, I even allude to this language where it's like when we start working together, we'll start with the language that you're familiar with, which again is the governance and structure and things like that. And then as we move, the idea is to move away from that language and to move to things that are a bit more fluid. So instead of, say, governance, we're moving to decision making
Hmm.
that's more fluid, that makes more sense to people. And so I even have this kind of clarified a little bit of like, we'll start where you are. And then the idea is to get you to move, towards something that can evolve, not transform in a big bang.
Yeah. I'm going to reflect on something that is similar in Kelly and I's past that I don't think we have talked about before, which is I grew up with a father who was a civil engineer in New York City in heavy construction, which meant bridges, tunnels, fan plants, and subways, things that had to, in some ways, be flexible to deal with the conditions of the
mhm.
outside world, right? So when
Even
we think
even as they looked very rigid.
exactly, and they people needed to feel like they were stable also, because as you're driving over a bridge, you don't wanna think about the possibility that it's moving, right? But it has to be able to have some amount of give in order to survive, and so, I think I pull from some of that also just having grown up hearing about all of these types of roads being built and such. Um, FDR Drive goes out over the water. That's a project that my father's very proud of. And how do we help organizations do the same thing, like survive if all of a sudden they find themselves in unusual circumstances? And I think the evolving helps build something we've talked about on this podcast quite a bit, helps build resiliency as well for organizations.
It absolutely does. And like exactly what you were describing just came to my mind that, as Gary and I spent time in California, our
Hmm.
buildings and structures also
Yes.
have to have this give because we've got the earthquakes out there.
Yeah.
So even these things that are real solid also have to have a little bit of give, right? Otherwise, when the next earthquake comes, even if it's not a very big one, everything falls apart.
Hmm.
But this idea of resilience is so important. And one of the things that I look at within an organization is who do you have working there? You need to keep an eye on the people because one of the big disconnects that I've seen is organizations who may be quite adaptable, but the people within them are not very resilient to change. And this can cause kind of unused change capacity where the
Hmm.
organization's not able to change as quickly as their structure has set them up to be. Or vice versa, you have people that are incredibly resilient in an organization that is so static and so solid that it can't keep up with the people within them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this leads to burnout.
Yeah. Or people leave, right, to go find
Yeah.
an environment where they can feel like they're contributing.
Yep.
I'm curious from both of your perspectives, like Gary, yours as well, when we think about the stable structures and we think about the role leaders play in either creating the environment or being unable to be flexible and how that impacts the rest of the team.
Yeah. I'll let Kelly go first.
This is definitely one of the things that will make or break a transformation. So it was one of the missing pieces when I was coaching, when I was an agile coach, where I saw, okay, is the person you could find as the executive sponsor is kind of number one. Without this support, you're going to get nowhere. The whole idea behind agile coaching and whether you're a scrum master, agile coach, Kanban, whatever you're working on, when I was coaching, everything was like, okay, bottom up, work from the bottom up. And then from a change management perspective, it's like, yeah, forget it. You are going to get nowhere. And it can be both.
Mhm.
So that's fine. But then there's this layer, beyond the executive sponsor, where you have the middle managers, where you have the people who you really expect to drive the change throughout the organization. Of course, hopefully with the support of an excellent change manager, And really what I have found is that a lot of leaders, the ones who want to do it, just haven't been given the skills, and it's definitely trainable. I have a leading through change workshop, and really in like a half day or a full day workshop, you really can prepare leaders to say, okay, this is what's expected of you now. And here's how you can behave, and here's some tools, and let's practice it. And, here's some support afterwards. And I really found that that's quite effective in really just setting the expectation, because in so many organizations, and I've worked in things in industries that are quite stable and also
Mhm.
banking, manufacturing, construction, people were put into leadership positions because they had all the answers, they could do everything, and that they were able to convey certainty. And when you're leading through a transformation, you don't have all the answers up front, and you are uncertain about things, and somehow you still need to lead people through that in a way. And so, kind of, coaching leadership and working with leadership on how to answer those questions, how to have effective two-way communication without all the information up front.
Yeah. Harry,
It's really important.
before
Mhm.
we turn it to you, just one thought based off of what Kelly was saying, which is when we start a transformation, one of the things I'm always listening for in the discovery portion is how willing are the leaders to change? Because
Mhm.
otherwise, what you're saying is it's very hard for the rest of the organization to come along.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Kim, you kind of hinted at something that for me is fundamental as we work with clients, whether individual leaders or teams or whole organizations, on their intentions and their aspirations to be more resilient, more capable of adapting to current competitive environments. I always go back to two fundamental variables. One is, and it's pretty self evident, how capable are you of leading a change? Have you done this before? Do you feel skilled at it? Are you naive? Are you curious? Are you scared? But there's this capability of, yes, I've done this before, or no, I've been part of this before, but I haven't led it before, or I've never experienced this at all. Right. And intersecting with that is a spectrum of belief. I believe this is the right direction for us to go versus I'm open to this versus I'm not bought in yet. And each, as you intersect those two things, capability and belief or buy-in, you start to come to different conclusions. You can have a leader who is quite capable of leading change and transformation and an avowed skeptic. That's a different problem to solve than somebody who believes we have a need for change and I don't know how to do this. I once got brought into an organization by somebody who said, I believe to my core we need to change. I have no idea even how to get started. And that was the transition point to bring somebody in to help with that. There's a whole set of things that cascade off of that. But I'd actually like to get Kelly's perspective on what I just said and see how the conversation evolves from there.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, Gary, that when you're looking at, how to build a transformation, and a lot of that buy-in or not, or buy-in or skepticism, will stem out of how involved the leaders were in coming to that decision in the first place. So I have found the involvement from the beginning is a big indicator of how much buy-in you will get from leadership, because even people who may be a bit skeptical, if they were involved in the process of how you arrived at the decision from the beginning anyway, if they can understand, okay, this may be not the way I would have chosen, but I know why we're doing it. And so I will go along with it. It makes such a huge difference, as opposed to, okay, I was just told by the executives or the supervisory board or what have you, this is what we have to do, and they're unaware of the reasons why, of what the expected benefits are. They might have a lack of belief that the organization can actually handle the change, which is a big thing to overcome. And this kind of not knowing where to start is exactly where kind of my diagnostic tool comes in. Because a lot of people come to me and it's like, I know we need to do something different. My organization is stuck. We don't change well, but where do you begin? And so this is where this diagnostic comes in. It's like, well, let's take a look. And we look at all the areas of the organization. And I don't mean departments, but kind of, how do you see what changes are coming? How do you respond? What governance do you have in place and infrastructure? And what people do you have working there? What's the culture? How do you build capability there? And so we look at 6 different areas, and whatever is kind of lowest, that's where we start to begin on quick wins. And okay, there are some things that we can do to get the organization to move a bit easier with a little
Yeah.
bit less friction.
I think what's important about what you just said. So, CMG's got our Thrive number assessment, slightly different questions than yours has, but similar 6 areas. It also talks about bias for change, and is there, a bias for change or a fear of moving things. And what is most important, I think, is post the assessment, something that you just hit on, which is how do we prioritize what to do first? Like, what if all of
Mhm.
our areas are red
Or low.
or have opportunities in them, right? And so
Yeah.
taking folks through that prioritization of those opportunities so that we're not just over indexing on one particular area and then still missing a go-to-market opportunity, for example, because we're so focused on, oh, we got really great at strategy, but we can't execute it all. The problem, right? So helping teams find what will help them bend, taking the construction analogy to nature, right? Different trees are going to react differently, right? In Florida, we've got a lot of palm trees because when a hurricane comes through, they're going to bend, but they're not going to come down. And so finding the places where we can prioritize and have an impact and build in the resiliency to bend a little bit at a time to just continue to build momentum of energy of the change, positive energy of the change.
Well, I think you touched on a couple of things, both of you, in terms of stepping back and reflecting, using an assessment. We're very familiar with our Thrive Number tool, which similarly is broad enough to say, are you aware of your circumstances? Right? Because if you're not aware of your circumstances, that is frequently a place to start. Let's get to a sense of, yes, here is where we are. Are we in the forest? Are we in the desert? Are we in a boat in the middle of the ocean? Right? Those circumstances can really influence then what next. And I try to think of diagnostics like this as the compass. They're not a verdict. They're not backwards looking. What they do is they indicate where next. And that where next can be very different depending on the makeup of an organization. However, there's usually some clarity that comes out of that. And I'm also kind of curious, Kelly, as you think about this, something that we see at times with our clients as we're going through these processes, people pursuing perfection. They're looking for the optimal choice. And to
Yeah.
bring this back to structure, who reports to who? How does the org chart play out? There's a lot of sort of tinkering in that space that can get in the way of, we have a sufficient amount of input to understand this is the next right step. And then we'll figure it out from there. And that may resonate with you from your project and program management background. I'm curious how you approach that concept.
It's interesting. I was just on LinkedIn today, and someone was talking about a reorg that they had done unsuccessfully as a consultant. And my comment to them, the last sentence in my comment, it was literally today, was that the org structure is the least fascinating or least interesting aspect of how an organization works. Some people really need it, but to me, it doesn't tell you really how decisions are made, who influences who and what. Because oftentimes the org chart doesn't tell the real story about, who's holding,
Yeah.
the decision making or the influence, right? Sometimes it's when something needs to move forward or a decision needs to be made. I've seen CEOs ask their assistant. They're not asking their directors. They're
Correct.
asking the assistant
Correct.
to the CEO because he or she is closest to the CEO, knows how this person thinks, and so that's really, to me, quite fascinating. But um, But yeah, we're oftentimes this pursuit of perfection slows organizations down. And oftentimes that's because there's not an idea of done. Going back to like agile coaching, right? What's the definition of done? How far do we need to go on this work until we say we're done and we're moving on? And that's often not clear, so people just continue to work on it. And I
Hmm.
always go back to this example of like, okay, if somebody said, "Hey, you need to clean your house,"
Hmm.
I could spend a whole day cleaning my house or a couple days cleaning my entire house. But if you said someone is coming to your house in an hour, and so you gotta clean it up, I would
The
have a much different
downstairs of
approach.
the house. Yes.
Yeah. So I would have a much
Parts they're
different
gonna
approach.
see.
Yeah, I wouldn't be looking for perfection, right? Like disinfecting every square foot of my house and square centimeter, and I would look at what needs to get done so that it's done for the purpose that's intended.
What you're talking about, right, is we're doing work, we're doing work, we're doing work, and we're getting more value while we're doing work. And then eventually we're not getting any more value. And so that's when we can decide we've gotten the most out of this and we can stop working on it. Um, yeah.
I'm I want to bring this back to some of the structure stuff because the two quotes, and then I'll ask another question. I once was working with an organization, and a senior leader there said, "What do you mean this is going to take this amount of time?" And I said, "Well, we're looking for behavior change. We're looking to reconnect some relationships within the organization. And that's not something that happens overnight." And the quote that came back was, "I thought we just reorged and everything was solved." And and I love the laugh on that one. At the other end of the spectrum, I worked with a CEO who really pushed his direct report team, his leadership team off on the org stuff because he was so adamant about being sharp on strategy and priorities. Because for him, the organization was derivative from the intentions. And, those sort of have always set different ends of that spectrum for me. And I'm curious, as you sort of approach the space, and clearly you think about it a lot, what are some of the hallmarks of an organization that breaks out of a brittle, rigid structure and into one that is capable of some evolution?
Yeah. One of the things I've seen that makes the biggest difference is organizational alignment, which is also a term most misunderstood. Um, but when there is organizational alignment, things like what the org structure it looks like on paper, and who someone reports to directly or indirectly, or whatever, it really becomes something almost irrelevant. Some
Hmm.
countries have different rules on that, and like it can't be completely irrelevant. But when people understand where the organization is going, there's a clear strategy, and a clear kind of method of execution, and there whether you and it doesn't really matter at all whether you use KPIs, OKRs, whatever it is, but when it's clear and everybody in the organization knows what it is, it's so much easier to move things around and make changes when everybody understands what they're trying to work towards on an individual basis, not just, okay, marketing is supposed to help with marketing and like sales is supposed to sell and no, beyond that, but like as an individual, here's what I need to do. It's really irrelevant who I report to.
Yeah, folks
Uh,
need to see themselves in their work. And to the earlier point of, org charts, I've worked in many transformations where people are like, "Oh, but have you reviewed our org chart?" I'd rather walk your hallways because that will tell me who's really in charge. Um, but the portion around the org design is not the answer. Like can't just move people around. We have to change behaviors. We have to have common language is so important. Working with some organization right now who, we'll throw business terms out and they're mostly journalists who work in a communications department and they don't understand business terms. And so therefore the goals don't necessarily make sense to them because they happen to fall under a marketing organization, but the business goals don't make sense. So bringing them to that common language is a hugely important part of their evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to have a common language and make sure that, the strategy and the priority and things like that for the business, resonate and make sense to everyone in the organization. And to me, this is so fun when I get to work in that space where we're coming up with, strategy and objectives and how does this look at every piece of the organization and is it clear and then going to those different areas of the organization and saying, okay, here's our objectives. Like, what is it that you're planning on working on, and how is this tying into on an organizational level? Oh, talk about enthusiasm. Like, I love this.
So maybe in that space, let's do a little compare and contrast. So if Kelly, you were to use a handful of terms, two or three descriptors of an organization that needs to think about its evolution, its resilience, its ability to adapt, versus one that's actually good at that stuff. How would you sort of characterize each of those in a way that our listeners might be able to use as a reflection on their own circumstance?
hmm I would definitely use adaptive. Obviously. And although I'm a fan of agile, so many people immediately go to the technological part, or the technology part of that. And so I really like adaptability, as one, and also sensing. So one of the things I've seen in organizations that can adapt well, they see what's coming. They can sense or and assess what's coming before it hits them like a truck. So, what systems and things do they have in place to say, okay, what's happening around us and within us that that's telling us we need to do something differently. And probably the third, I want to think of a third one. Really is leadership. I mean, honestly, you cannot have an adaptive organization that's successful with leadership that cannot lead through a change and lead through uncertainty, and leaders who are adaptable and resilient.
On that last point, it's interesting for me. Um, on the sort of ability to sense that you talked about, which leads to this adaptability. There's an element of we don't pay enough attention. So essentially, the decisions we make are in a black box, right? We're hoping that we're making the right decisions, but they're not informed choices. At the other end, you can get into sort of analysis paralysis. Everything is but what if we looked at something else? There's a sweet spot there. And when we think about the leaders and where you went with that, I often sort of steal some nautical terms to talk about change. Is this change from the helm,
hmm
people in fancy suits with nice hats and a steering wheel, or is it change from the engine room, where you've
hmm
actually got a group of people stoking coal into one engine versus the other? And it ideally works when both of those are in harmony. Um, because when you talk about those leaders, sometimes the sensing is not external. It's not necessarily a competitive thing. It might be an internal stimulus that says, oh, I'm either observing or not observing our capability to deliver new value or reduce cost or be more efficient or learn new skills. What in the world are we going to do with AI, right? That's something that we deal with our clients frequently now. Um, so does that make sense to you, or do you have a different way of kind of coming at this that would be helpful?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And this is also part of that list. Whenever there's a change that needs to happen, I honestly try to uh, encourage as much as possible this co-creation.
Hmm.
And this is again one of those reasons why I love this kind of work because everything is different no matter what. If you're working on a restructuring, I could work on a restructuring with five different clients and it will look different five different ways, 10 different ways, even with only five clients. But everything is different because whoever needs to be in that room, say the virtual room of making the decisions, is going to be a mix of leaders, people on the ground, people, everybody in the middle. Having the right people in there making the right decisions is imperative to making it a success. So definitely it should be both. And this is why I loved this kind of from my old agile coaching days, plus then mixed with change management, where it was go from the bottom. Change management is saying, no, you need executive sponsorship. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's let's look at the problem at hand and who needs to be in this room in order to make these decisions and make it happen. Because if you have only people that are, in the what was the sailing term, in the steam room or in the
Mhm.
engine
Yeah.
room,
Yeah.
the
There you
Mhm.
go.
engine room, they might be missing the organizational context. And if you only have the people that are at the helm, or at the executive level, they might be missing all the things that happen below them, because that's not what their role is. It's their role is not to know every single tiny detail of what's happening in the organization. But so you need kind of both of these, and the people also sometimes in between, to manage those
I mean,
decisions.
what we're talking about here is David Marquette's work, which is turn the ship around, right? And he talks about taking over a naval submarine, and it was had nuclear subs on it, and he moved from one type of submarine to another, thinking that they were very similar, and he didn't have the time to learn everything that was going on in the engine room, and he had to shift the way that he led that sub because he had to rely more on the people that were on the front lines, as we call it in the business world, but the people that were in the engine room. And when he started on that journey, he would give an order as the captain, and they would say, "Very well, captain," but that sub couldn't even do the thing he was asking for. But they didn't, their structure, back to where we started this conversation, was not built where the people in the engine room could say no, because very hierarchical organization, right? So I think that's part of what we're talking about here is how do you design organizations so that the people in the engine room can say, we know something you don't.
Or are in a position to say, we understand your intentions.
Yes.
We'll figure out how to deliver on that. And
Intent-based
this
leadership.
idea, yeah. And, it's interesting that you brought this up. And part of the reason I use the nautical terms, right? Had a guy who worked with me at a prior company who ran the nuclear reactor on a
Mm-hmm.
naval vessel. And as we think through some of the characteristics that lead to adaptability and resilience in moments of change, I always think through something that you touched on earlier, Kelly. People who get to a certain level because they bring a certainty, they bring a skill set, they bring the answer. And
Mhm.
we had a recent guest who touched on this as well and said at some point you become a leader and you don't have the answers, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Your job then starts to shift to be the one who creates the space for other people to deliver the answers. And, whether it's a naval vessel or it's a big multinational organization or it's, your grandpa's laundromat, at some point, things start to get to a point where it's like, hey, I don't need to be the one who says thumbs up or thumbs down on everything. Part of the role of a solid leader is to simply be clear in this is the direction we intend to go, and these are how we're prioritizing our efforts to get there. And then let people do what they're good at.
This exactly what you're describing goes back to this alignment, of being clear about like this is where the organization needs to go,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of get out of the way and trust that you've got the right people there. Be there to answer questions, to clarify. If there's some kind of roadblock as a leader, you need to be there to remove that roadblock or find a way around it, build a bridge over it, whatever the case may be. But the skills that are required nowadays to manage and lead people are no longer the skills that were required 5 years ago, even 10 years. I mean, they're completely, it used to be you need to be the decision maker, the knowledge, hub, and you need to have all the answers. And that's just no longer the case. That's not how organizations um, need people anymore. It really is, you need to be the person who's cultivating the people who can make decisions and
Mm-hmm.
who have the answers.
Yes. So we're at a point where I usually ask our guest, in this case you, Kelly, anything that as we were entering this conversation, you were like, I sure hope we touch on this, that we maybe haven't surfaced yet before we wrap up today?
I think we've covered so much, but I will say we touched on it a little bit, but I will put a wrapper around it. The importance of, of course, working with an organization, which is kind of the space that the three of us are in on an organizational level, but then also looking at the people that work there. And this is why I have these two assessments that I use is, of course, it's important to know where the organization is in terms of maturity, no matter what assessment you use. But also I have a change resilience assessment that I use, and that's on an individual basis. So how am I handling change? How do I handle it? And, organizations can have employees, and there are a lot of assessments out there, whether you use mine that's on the comparative agility website or you use some other one. Personal resilience is something, it's a muscle, it's a skill that people can build. And it's definitely something that is one of the things I think people need going forward. It's 2026. The world is changing faster than we've ever seen it before, and it's not going to slow down. So personal resilience is one of those things I think all people can work on. And like I said, it's a skill that you can build. It's a muscle, just like going to the gym and working out. And and I'm the perfect example of somebody who's done that. I used to be someone who lived by a schedule, who got very unnerved by something changing, and now I cannot stand sameness. So, and
Yeah.
it was through a process of like building this skill and doing it. And I think to have an organization that's truly adaptable and can be like an ecosystem instead of like a static, solid structure, you need to have the organization and you need to have the people.
Mhm. And
So
I think,
this is, yeah, go ahead.
my sense is this idea of the building blocks of a resilient organization, being this combination of resilient individuals, which, as you just said, that's a skill. I appreciate everything that you were able to bring to us in terms of wisdom and perspective, Kelly. This has been great. Kim, as always, thank you very much. And for everybody out there, thanks for listening. This is the Fault Line, CMG Consulting's podcast. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or follow us on LinkedIn or just come to cmgconsulting.com. Until next time, thanks very much.